Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Peter Duran, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Peter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about a situation right now that is still developing. The United States is continuing its efforts to broker a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And this comes as Russia launched an attack on Kyiv, the deadliest the country's capital has seen in months. How would you characterize where we are right now in a potential peace agreement?
Well, Brittany, the peace agreement has the potential to collapse in front of our eyes. In the last day or so, President Trump has been browbeating Ukrainian President Zelensky on social media, and yet it was Russian President Vladimir Putin who took the opportunity to launch the largest attack on Ukrainian civilians in their capital of Kyiv since last summer. So if Vladimir Putin wants peace, he has a very violent way of expressing himself.
I want to talk about President Trump's recent social media posts being very critical of both President Volodymyr Zelensky as well as Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And we know that President Trump in the past, since he began this second term, has been very critical of Zelensky ever since that February explosive White House meeting between Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as Zelensky. This is what he posted on Truth Social Wednesday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. This statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. He also added to this, the statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong the killing field, and nobody wants that. We are very close to a deal, but the man with no cards to play should now finally get it done. He then posted this about Putin on Thursday. I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. What do you make about these rebukes about both of these leaders, but especially that President Trump is more critical of Volodymyr Zelensky? He's publicly saying that the Ukrainian president has no cards to play.
Well, let's look at the Putin chastisement. Brittany, if all we needed to stop this war was simply to tell Vladimir Putin to stop, this war would have stopped a long time ago. Yes, you're absolutely correct to point out that President Trump has focused a lot of his attention on pressuring the Ukrainian side, but it's the Ukrainians who have given the Trump White House everything they've asked for. They have said, we will absolutely agree to a 30-day ceasefire with zero conditions. When the ball went to the other side of the court, to Vladimir Putin's side of the court, the Russians began to inject all of these poison pills into the negotiation process. These would be details that they insist the Ukrainians agree to, knowing full well that the Ukrainians nor the United States would ever agree to these things, such as U.S. and international recognition of Russia's stolen land in Crimea. Brittany, there is a U.S. law signed by President Trump himself, which says the United States will never recognize Russia's stolen land there in Crimea. So in one sense, President Trump is not only negotiating against himself and the U.S. Congress, but also against Vladimir Putin, while the Ukrainians are saying, we'll agree to all of your terms just to stop the fighting. This is the very complex environment in which Trump finds himself in, but the main obstacle to peace, I should say, is Vladimir Putin, not the Ukrainians.
Let's talk about that Crimea piece, because President Trump told Time magazine Crimea will stay with Russia, and Zelensky understands that, and everybody understands that. It's been with them for a long time. So what do you make of that? Because that's a non-starter for Ukraine, that Crimea stays with Russia. So talk to us about that.
Well, I have seen many of Envoy Witkoff's statements, and unfortunately, many of them are not aligned with the historical facts. The fact is that Crimea and the Donbass, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, all of the regions that Russia insists it control as a result of this war, these are all Ukrainian territories. Look at specifically Crimea. Brittany, in the 1990s, there was an election in Crimea, and the majority of the voters there said, we don't want to be part of Russia. We want to be part of a newly independent and free Ukraine. That's significant. So by sending in his troops and saying, this is mine now, well, Brittany, the United States has dealt with armies and aggressive leaders like this in the past, and we always say for over 100 years, we will not recognize your stolen goods, your stolen land. That's important because if we do, we risk inviting endless wars around the world.
What do you think makes this time different that President Trump is open to the possibility that Crimea now belongs to Russia?
Well, he's obviously trying to enact the art of the deal. He's very proud of his negotiation skills. He's dealt with some difficult negotiations in the past. But when it comes to Vladimir Putin, I think there is a fatal flaw in the White House's current approach. And that flaw is that Putin wants peace. So far, Vladimir Putin has given no substantive indication that he truly desires peace. He certainly wants to string the Americans along, string the Ukrainians along. He gains time, international prestige, and and he gets to show his own people that he's a strong leader who's taken seriously by the international community. It's time to take off the velvet gloves from the American side and apply more pressure. That's the only way that Vladimir Putin is going to be cajoled into taking this peace process seriously.
What does taking off the velvet gloves, in your opinion, look like? Because President Trump said Russia not taking all of Ukraine and stopping the war, those, he said, are two pretty big concessions. So what does taking the gloves off look like?
Well, think about what that means also. This is a standard Russian negotiation tactic. We've seen this for decades. None of this is new. Russia creates a problem, in this case, invading Ukraine and trying to destroy the country. And then Russia negotiates for concessions to end a problem that it started and it controls. It's a very standard Russian negotiation tactic. And if the United States was smart, we would call that out. And then we would pivot. And that means applying the same threats that President Trump himself has already said he would do if he thought Vladimir Putin wasn't taking him seriously. This includes secondary sanctions on the banks and trading partners that are helping facilitate Russia to evade our sanctions. That also means ending a Biden-era loophole called the oil price cap, which allows Russia to sell millions and millions of barrels of oil on the international market without incurring a sanctions penalty. There are a lot of economic measures we can take, in addition to continued military support of Ukraine, that would show Vladimir Putin, you're not going to win this negotiation by stringing us along.
If you could explain this, tell me if I'm wrong here. So essentially, over 3 years ago, Russia invades Ukraine. Now they were engaged in a war for over 3 years. Now the United States is essentially saying, hey, Ukraine, you're lucky that Russia is not taking over all of you. I mean, what does that signal to the rest of the world?
Well, let's also recall that this war has been going on since 2014. It was only in 2022 that Vladimir Putin committed to a full-scale invasion and declared that he was going to erase Ukraine from the map as an independent state. That is his ultimate war aim. So to have President Trump say it is a concession on the part of the Russians not to destroy Ukraine as a polity, as a society, well, that's, again, a problem Russia has created, and Russia wants to negotiate concessions to solve a problem that it controls and created in the first place. This is a terrible negotiation position for the United States to take, and the alternative, like I said, is to take off those velvet gloves and apply maximum economic pressure on Vladimir Putin. That means denying him the ability to make money from oil sales, money that fuels his war machine. Brittany, think about this. The European Union has sent to Russia more money since February of 2022 than it has sent to by way of oil purchases and gas purchases than it has sent to the Ukrainians in the form of military assistance. In the West, we are funding both sides of this war. If we're going to radically shake things up, if we're going to achieve a ceasefire and then an enduring peace, we have to stop funding both sides of the war. We need to apply maximum economic pressure on Vladimir Putin.
President Trump said on the campaign trail, he vowed, I could end this war in a day. We are nearing the first 100 days, the end of President Trump's second term. Still, the war continues to rage on. Do you think that he feels some pressure to get this war done? And that's kind of why you're seeing these almost rushed negotiations.
He's obviously set an internal timeline for himself. We know this because the president has stated as much. Sure, on the campaign trail, he promised one day. We all know, however, President Trump likes to use what I'd call rhetorical hyperbole to underscore deeper truth. Obviously, he has made the assumption that both sides want peace because President Trump, I believe, is absolutely genuine. He wants the killing to stop. And if he wants the killing to stop, certainly in his calculation, both sides would want the same. There is a flaw in this analysis, and that is that Vladimir Putin actually feels the same way. We have seen Vladimir Putin communicate two signals to President Trump. On one hand, he makes his phone calls and says, "Yes, I want peace," and on the other, he continues a sustained bombardment against the Ukrainian people. Actions here speak louder than Vladimir Putin's words, and Putin's actions absolutely indicate he wants this war to continue. Brittany, remember, this war justifies his dictatorship. This war allows him to spread money around his governing society, the elites of his society, and keeps him in power. If this war were to end tomorrow, Vladimir Putin would have a political problem on his hands at home. He wants this war to continue. It allows him to sustain his rule. And I think if we're going to be successful in our negotiations with Putin, we need to embrace reality and no longer operate in fantasy land when it comes to our assumptions about Russia's dictator.
Let's talk about embracing reality because President Trump, he wants the killing to stop. He said that as much. But let's say in this deal, Ukraine concedes some land to Russia. Based on history, based on what we're seeing now, is there any indication that that's good enough for Russia, that Russia would stop? Or does Russia want more?
We know Russia wants more because Vladimir Putin has told us this. He has made he's given several interviews over the last year in which he has been explicit, naming off all of the countries that used to be part of the far-flung Russian Empire over a century ago and even older than that. And he has said, these are all Russian lands right now. I am focused specifically on Ukraine. But so when the Ukrainians say we are a living shield for the rest of Europe, if we fall, Russia will then start attacking other US allies in Europe. The Ukrainians are not off base. They're simply repeating what Putin himself has said are his intentions. These are very high stakes. Now, when it comes to how do we get to a ceasefire and a longer term peace, obviously freezing the line of battle where it is right now, not allowing Russia to take over parts of Ukraine that it does not currently control, and then injecting European security guarantors into this mix. Well, those are critical components of any enduring peace. That's where we need to get to. But right now, there are no indications that Putin has any desire to get to that point.
I hear you when you say that these are really high stakes, but just how high are these stakes? Is there any indication that Ukraine concedes some land here and then Russia eventually steamrolls Ukraine? There's a World War III and they attack American allies in Europe.
Well, I think that's an accurate assessment. Just think about this. Right now, according to public reporting, NATO's Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe has calculated that Russia will be in a position to attack a US NATO ally in Europe in less than 5 years. And that's under current conditions. What we could see as a nightmare scenario is that there is a short-term peace, the fighting stops, Russia rebuilds, retools, and has learned a lot of lessons from the war over the past few years, and doesn't make any of the past mistakes again. That would be in line with Russia's traditional way of fighting. Fight, 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 lose, 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 learn those lessons, and then win, win, win. That's how Russia won on the Eastern Front in Europe, and that is our nightmare scenario in 21st century Europe. Preventing that means stabilizing the line of battle now, re-bolstering, re-equipping, rearming Ukraine, and then making sure that we communicate through our alliance structures that any attack on Ukraine or a NATO country would be a catastrophic mistake on Russia's part. Signaling back in 2022 was all wrong, and we led perhaps Vladimir Putin to believe he could do another smash and grab and take the whole country as he did in a smaller scale in 2014 with Crimea. Signaling and action are how we prevent nightmare scenarios.
Earlier this week, the United States threatened to abandon these peace talks if Ukraine and Russia couldn't come to an agreement. How real do you think that threat is, and what happens if the United States follows through on that?
Well, certainly We have learned one important lesson, and that is Vladimir Putin doesn't bluff. If he says he's going to do something, he intends to follow through. One of the biggest mistakes that we've made in the West over the last 2 decades, think about that, is to hear what Vladimir Putin says and dismiss him, thinking, well, that's too crazy. That's too aggressive. He would never try that or consider that. And yet, Vladimir Putin always follows through on his threats. When Vladimir Putin says something, we need to take it very seriously and assume he's speaking the truth, at least from his perspective.
President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is in Moscow meeting with Putin today. What are you expecting to come out of that conversation? What are you looking out for after that meeting?
I expect Putin to do what he's always done with Envoy Witkoff, that is to play the good cop. Remember, his military plays the bad cop in this scenario. Often, he's very clearly created a close relationship with Envoy Witkoff, perhaps too close. If the United States is acting as a neutral mediator between two warring parties, you don't want to be seen as favoring one side. It will antagonize the other side. So I expect Vladimir Putin to insert new poison pills into the negotiation process, saying, well, if only the Ukrainians would give me one more thing, then maybe I'd think about stopping my armies from fighting the Ukrainians. Obviously, he's playing for time. He's stringing along the White House. He thinks he's in control of these negotiations because he's not negotiating. He's dictating terms. Vladimir Putin is dictating the terms of a potential peace. That's not good for the United States. It's terrible for the Ukrainians. And that's why, like I said, we should slam the door on Putin's negotiation technique, take off the velvet gloves, and apply maximum economic pressure on Russia to force Putin screaming to the peace table, begging for a ceasefire. That's how you negotiate with Moscow.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for. And as the situation continues to develop, Peter Duran, I hope you come back on and break it down with us. Thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for having me.